So this body of work is called GROOT, which means growing big in gangland. And I spent 9 years, not unlike my other uh, bodies of work where I'm with the subject for a long time, and this was the longest, it was 9 years. And I was approached by the head of the 28 gangs in Cape Town, Ernie Lustig Solomon, to photograph him. I became very curious about what the gang world was and what their neighborhood was where they lived. So he invited me in, which I was very fortunate because it was very dangerous to go in there. However, the journey was one of great learning for me. They were thrown out of District 6 during apartheid. So families were splintered and spread out into the Cape Flats, which ran about 14 miles across. They sort of formed this gang world, which started in prison, which was the number gangs. And Ernie Lustig, people would say to me, well, why would you want to associate yourself with somebody like him? Because he wanted to share who he was. He wanted to be accepted into the other cultures of South Africa. So I went in there and I would only photograph him on condition. When he asked for me to photograph him, I went and did some research and I discovered that he was from this little village called Wuppertal, what essentially his family was, the Solomons. So I went out there, which was a 4-hour drive on a dirt road, and I found this little village where they made shoes and they grew rooibos tea. So when his handlers called me back and they said, well, have you thought about taking these pictures? I said, yes. I want to photograph Ernie, the godfather, the head of the 28s, who had been in prison for 13 years as a child. And they were like, I don't think that's possible. I said, well, then I'm not interested. I really need to tie it into a narrative and tell the story that needs to be told. So he called me and he said, what do you want to do? So I told him, he said, okay, let's do it. So that allowed me into his neighborhoods, a place called Elsie's River in Cape Town, or just out of Cape Town. So I went in there and I found Quintino, and Quintino was 4.5 years old when I started photographing him. And as I journeyed through the 9 years, I followed Quintino, and I photographed him for 9 years until he was 13 years old. And I just watched the behavioral patterns that took place for their survival. They didn't know anything else in that world. This kid, when I took him and his father into the main city, Cape Town, they could see from where they lived. It was 14 miles away, they could see the mountain. So when I drove them into Cape Town and they saw the mountain, I said, Quintino, look, there's Table Mountain. He was like, it's not. It can't be. It doesn't look like that from my house. So this was just such a great reveal for me because they'd never been into the city. They'd lived there all their lives, but he had never seen that. So I just continued photographing him and watching the evolution of how they started running errands for other gang members in order to have money. The father had no education, so what could he do? So it was a very, very complex journey of me understanding who these people were. And Ernie Lustig, the godfather, I went out there, I photographed him like a child, and I put together this body of work which really speaks about becoming who he became. And you can see the same pattern reoccurring in this environment, to where these kids didn't know they were joining a gang. They didn't know they were part of that because they didn't know anything else. I wanted to present this body of work so people around the world could really have a deeper understanding of who human beings are, living in a certain place. People go, well, that's gang culture. Well, there's 500,000 number gang members in the Western Cape alone. What has caused them to be this way? When I was interviewed by someone from the BBC in Johannesburg at the art fair, they were like, but these people are scum. And ironically, Ernie was there and I got him up and he said to them, well, that just depends. You grew up in London, you got a certain kind of education which enables you to judge me against what you've got. But I never had that, and I can't turn that back. I am who I am. I ran into this guy, Mr. Williams, and when I was photographing, I'd call Mr. Williams up and I'd say, I'm coming out on Wednesday to photograph Quintino. He'd go, no, Gordon, don't come Wednesday, come Thursday. They kill each other Wednesday. And people would go, well, did some people get out of the gangs and get away from it? Yes, of course they did, if they got out of there. But they were everything was so connected. A kid would run an errand in a tire which would have some kind of drug in it or whatever they were doing. They didn't know. At the end, when they got to the end, they got a piece of chocolate or they got some food, and that's how they formed into this environment. They became that human being. They didn't know any different. And the kids growing up, and especially Quintino, who was now 14, I tried to get him into a school. I tried to help the family. They were just crippled by the world that they were formed into.